Well, good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to see you this bright and early Monday morning. I'm so excited that you decided to join us for daily devotions through Redeeming Life Fellowship. And we're excited today that we're going to continue stepping into this journey through the major prophets following the Revive School reading plan and jumping into Isaiah chapters 14 through 16. And what I want us to do today is take the time, if you haven't already, to read through Isaiah chapters 14 through 16, 14, 15, 16, and then we're going to pause, reflect on make a few observations, and then focus on a particular passage that I think is relevant to the whole section. So if you haven't, go ahead. Beth Ann, Bree, Tom, Thomas, B, Glenn, Bryce, Faith, go ahead and pause and just read through at your own pace Isaiah chapters 14, 15, and 16. So, all good? Ready, go. So, with Isaiah chapters 14, 15, and 16, we'll notice a whole lot of judgment, woe oracles. Let's first talk about what you might have noticed in reading Isaiah chapters 14, 15, and 16. Is that different from, say, the earlier chapters that we had read, like in Isaiah chapters 1 through 5, which are focused primarily on the nation of Israel and Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, that here the judgments and woe that Isaiah is speaking for in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, is directed outwards. It's not directed on the people of God, internally, localized in the nation of Israel, within that territory, but it's focused outward. And you'll see the judgments against Babylon for their cruel oppression. You'll notice judgments on Assyria, the impending superpower that's coming in from the north, woes against them for their oppression. You'll see judgments pronounced against the Philistines for their smug attitude, for the fall of over the death of a king of Israel. You also see prophecies against prophecies of judgment on the territory of Moab for their pride and their wealth and their conceit. And one of the reasons why I think that this is important is that it can be easy to want to think about the responsibility of God's judgment, for God to be a righteous judge, that is to either pronounce blessings for obedience on the people of God, or punishments for disobedience on the people of God, to really just be localized. That what God is doing is, if you could say so, merely just focused primarily on the people of God. And what Isaiah shows us is indeed just a snapshot of what a larger theme is, that that God is indeed sovereign over the nations, and that these nations are accountable to the God of Israel, which is strange, because that is indeed a scandalous idea, whether from the ancient perspective or a modern enlightened perspective. In the ancient perspective, that does tend to think of deities as localized in particular territories or domains, in that if one nation supplants another, that must mean that those gods are stronger than the other person's gods, in that whatever has been manifested in battle is indeed just a manifestation of one God triumphing over the other. And on the other hand, and on the modern side, we tend to think about gods as localized in cultures, that there's the Muslims who worship Allah, and there's the Jews who worship Yahweh, and the Christians who worship Jesus, and the Buddhists who follow Krishna, and so on and so forth. That in a world that is bubbling with different types of religious perspectives, that there's no one religion or faith or prescribed worship that has any kind of claim on all the others. And what we see here in the God who's revealed himself in Scripture is demonstrating, in fact, that the power of this God, if it is true, if the God who is revealed himself to the covenant people of God, if he's real, that means he has claims over the lives and the communities, the empires of the ancient world. And that even in the midst of all of this turmoil and uncertainty, that doesn't mean that God is not sovereign over all of creation, including the nations that rage against each other. And I think it actually comes to a point. Read with me Isaiah chapter 14, and this is verses 26 through 27. This, I think, summarizes, indeed, the theme that's over these chapters, and indeed will follow in chapter 17 tomorrow, but I digress. It says this: "This is the plan determined for the whole world. This is the hand," that's God's hand, "stretched out over all nations." Not some nations, not many nations, not just the big nations or the small nations, all nations. "For the Lord Almighty has purposed. Who can thwart him? His hand is stretched out. Who can turn it back?" And what he's speaking about there in that moment is speaking directly to the dominating superpower at Isaiah's time period, and that's Assyria. Why I think this is especially important for all of us is that the more that, whether we as individuals or we as a collective people tend to think of ourselves as masters of our own fate, that our pride begins to swell, and we become conceited, and think of ourselves as more control of our own lives than what is actually warranted. That the more that we're swollen with pride, the less that we're ever going to recognize God as who he is, as creator of the universe, and indeed sovereign over all of the universe. And the more that we can see that, the more that we can be put in our proper place. Indeed, be rightfully humbled in the presence of the living God. And so, with that in mind, I want us to actually jump into chapter 14, Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 20. And I think maybe a good many of you will recognize this passage, because this is the passage that is oftentimes referred to as this prophetic intimation that is an oracle that's revealed to Isaiah that is like this window into the celestial past of what happened when Satan, as an angel, before God, fell and became Satan. Lucifer, the shining one, falls and becomes the adversary, the chief demon who serves only to exalt himself and thwart the purposes of the living God. That's Satan. Let's just read it together. And it says this: "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountains. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit." Now, look at chapter 14, verse 3, and read and ask yourself, who is this referring to? And it says this: "On the day the Lord gives you, the people of God, relief from suffering and turmoil and cruel bondage, you will take up this taunt against" who? "The king of Babylon." We can interpret what or who is meant by the king of Babylon in many different ways, to be sure. But the most basic way to refer to this is that the king of Babylon is a human being, a person, flesh and blood, somebody like you and me, who says things like, "I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mountain of the assembly. I will ascend to the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." So as much as we would want to try and, I would say, spiritualize this this passage to take it to refer to Satan, which it may. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But it's important that we're following the details that Isaiah is leaving for us, and recognizing that there was once a human who became king of a nation who really believed that he was going to exalt himself above God. Indeed, make himself God. All power, having dominion over the entire earth, over his own life, and who thought because he exalted himself so high that never for once he would ever have to be accountable to the living God. And this is how he turns out. It says, "Those who see you stare at you. They ponder your fate. Is this the man who shook the earth and made its kingdoms tremble? The man who made the world a desert, who overthrew its cities and would not let his captives go home?" Indeed, what we're reading here is about a man who took his power, made it his own, and because he made it his own, brought about destruction not only to himself, but to everybody else around him. Let's continue. "All the kings of the nations lie in state, each in his own tomb, but you are cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch." The vision you might associate with something like this is a rotting carcass on the side of the road. Roadkill, cast out of the tomb, not buried, exposed, brought low in dishonor in the most dishonorable fashion. But yes, you are cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch. You are covered with the slain, with those pierced by the sword, those who descended to the stones of the pit. In other words, it's like this man is being buried or smothered with the carcasses of the people who he killed. Like a corpse trampled underfoot, you will not join them in burial, for you have destroyed your land and killed your people. Why this is important or relevant for us today is that while you or I may never be an emperor over a vast domain, our hearts can still be held captive with this same attitude that says, I would really rather be in control of my entire life and never have to be answerable to God. That in practice, we become our own gods, or our own saviors, and our own masters and lords. And as long as we do that, we will never be humble enough to look to God as he is and recognize we as ourselves, we're his creations, and we are answerable to him. In that if God humbles us, he does so that we can rescue us from the destruction of our own pride. And I pray that for you and I, that God would be the sort of person who rightfully humbles us, so that not only that we can be saved, but we can flourish, because we can allow God to be sovereign over our lives, and that we're then freed indeed to serve him and to love him wholeheartedly, because we recognize that we are not God, and there's never anything good that's going to come out of us becoming so pride and so self-absorbed and so self-righteous that we become, in effect, our own gods. So if you haven't today, look to God and say, God, you are God. I am your creation. Do with me today as you will. I will not ascend to the Most High, but I will humble myself before you, so that you can bring about your purposes, not only in my own life, but in the life of those around me, to give and indeed bring life and human flourishing to those around me, because I've humbled myself before you. So that's a little bit of Isaiah, chapters 14 through 16. Thank you so much for taking time to read together. If you haven't, do please subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get notifications to follow along with the daily devotions. And I'm really looking forward to the times when we are able to meet together, be it next Thursday or meeting here in person on Wednesdays and Sundays, so that we can not just read together in person, but also grow as a community, as the body of Christ, so that we can really learn how it means, or what it means, to become the people of God, to allow God to transform us from the inside out and make us something new. So God bless you, God keep you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.